take a look at the top of that PowerPoint. You'll see the First Metaphysicians. Remember at the beginning of the course, we talked about the 4 branches of philosophy, which were metaphysics, epistemology, axiology, and logic. Well, remember what metaphysics is? The study of the nature of reality. Aristotle taught us about this. Aristotle wrote one book he called Physics, which was about the natural world. And then he wrote another book called Metaphysics, which was a book about beyond the physical world. All right? So what metaphysics is dealing with issues not just of the world itself, but of ultimate reality. So that's what we need to try to figure out. The first metaphysicians were some early Greek philosophers, the very first Greek philosophers. They're called pre-Socratic philosophers. And they grappled with this issue of what constitutes the universe, or what constitutes reality. And they grappled with the issue of the one and the many. They considered it a problem. Where do we get the one thing? Or what is the underlying nature of all things? What is the nature of ultimate? What is ultimate reality? And what is the unity? How do we get from the one to the many? Now, most of us don't really seem to ask that question, do we? I mean, we ask the question, well, where did we get here? Why are we here? Where are we going? But the question of how do we get from the one to the many, we don't really ask, but it's something that really bothered those early Greek philosophers. They noticed how everything seemed to be unified in the universe, but they also noticed the diversity. And they asked the question, how do we explain the diversity? Doesn't everything need to be just kind of one thing? So they wrestled with this, and the very first philosopher, I think we could say, is Thales. I think Aristotle called him the first philosopher. And he tried to answer this question. Okay, now let me go back to for a second there. Okay, so look at the universe itself. We live in a universe. So there's unity in diversity within the universe. People have long recognized that the universe, it's unified, yet there's diversity within the universe. And so how do we get that diversity within the unity, or the unity within the diversity? And Thales' answer, well, first of all, he said that reality is one. There's only one thing. That's the basis of all reality. And he said that that one thing is water, which exists in different forms. Now, Thales lived a long time ago, about 600 years before Christ. And so he didn't have a lot of philosophers and thinkers that preceded him. And I don't know how much access he had to the Word of God, which would have helped, I think, answer some of his questions. I'm sure it would. But that's what his answer was. It's water. Well, another early Greek philosopher was Anaximenes. He said that air is the one thing. Now, he lived around the same time, a little later than Thales, from the same area, Miletus. And he said that air is the one, and it produces different things by thinning and thickening. And he actually produced the first recorded experiment. Okay, so we're going to do this right now, right here. Do this at home, right now. Follow me. All right. first of all, blow on your hand as if you had glasses and you were blowing on them very softly to get some moisture on the lens so that you can wipe it off. So just blow very softly. Do you see how warm that is? That's very warm. That's what Anaximenes called thick or thin air. The thin air was hot or warm. Now blow hard now. Now blow hard on your hand. It's cooler, isn't it? Well, thick air is cooler. Okay, you can test that again and again, and you're going to see that it's the same every time. All right, the next philosopher, pre-Socratic again, he said that fire is the one thing. Fire is the one thing. And fire is continually transformed in and out of other elements. But fire is the one thing. And he was the one who's famous for saying that everything is constantly changing. You could sum up his philosophy in an expression that you don't find in exact words, but you see in his philosophy this idea. You can't step into a river twice, because every time you step into it, it's a different river. I guess you could, that does make sense a little bit, right? Because the water, there's different water that's moving across your foot. But he had this idea that everything is constantly changing, everything's in flux, and I think there's a problem with that, but he makes a point. And then Parmenides, his philosophy was that all is one, and Zeno followed him on this, and that he said that existence is and non-existence is not, and the existence that is immobile, boundless, and equally extended in all directions from the center. And according to him, every thought which deals with motion and with the diversity of things is contrary to existence and must be false. And see, he actually denied motion, because existence is immobile. It's motionless. And then Zeno followed him, and he tried to prove Parmenides' philosophy by showing the impossibility of motion. And there's a couple paradoxes that he's famous for. One is the paradox that suggests that an arrow could never, once it's shot, could never reach the target that it's shot at. Not because the person shooting the arrow is a bad aim. We're going to presume that the archer had good aim, but the arrow is never going to reach the target because it would have to go through an infinite number of halfway points in order to reach the target. Okay, so first it's got to go halfway in order to get the full distance, right? But it also has to go halfway that to get to the target, and it has to go halfway of that, and then halfway of that, and so on. It would actually have to go through an infinite number of halfway points to reach the target, which means that it's going to take an infinite amount of time to get there, and so it'll never reach the target. Wow. Well, in some way that makes sense. Of course, we know that's not true. There must be something wrong with that. But you can kind of make sense of what he's saying, that if you have to go through an infinite number of points in order to get somewhere, you're never going to get there. How do you solve that one? What's the problem with that? Can you figure that out? let's maybe bring this up again. There's one more paradox I want to share with you that Zeno. He's very famous for this. Achilles and the tortoise. So you have Achilles and the tortoise. They're in a race. The tortoise gets a head start, but by the time Achilles reaches the point where the tortoise began, the tortoise is actually moving ahead a little bit. Okay, so then you start over, and Achilles has to then, but by the time he reaches that second point, the turtle's going to be even further, right? And the same principle. There's going to be an infinite number of times where the turtle or the tortoise is slightly ahead. And so Achilles is never going to catch up with the tortoise. Well, you know that doesn't make sense. I mean, you know that's not true, because if you're in a race and somebody gets a head start and you go faster than them, eventually you're going to pass them, right? But there's a logic with this that philosophers have tried to respond to for many, many years. And I'm going to have you watch. You'll see in one of the next pages, you'll see in Buzz, you're going to see a video, like a 1-minute video that discusses this a little bit. So it's very famous. But what's the basic problem with this? I think one of the problems with both that paradox and the previous one with the arrow and the target is the confusion between a theoretical number of points, an infinite number of points, and an actual number of halfway points. I think you could probably say that there's a finite number of actual points versus a theoretical infinity. I guess you could apply it to a timeline or a line. That's one of the problems, I think, and it may be more complicated than that. But the other issue, I think, is with Achilles and the tortoise. If you give Achilles a long enough time before you kind of restart it, he's going to overpass the tortoise. We know that. And so it depends on what, if you reset it every time, if you reset the starting point every single time the tortoise or the Achilles reaches the point where the tortoise was, then you could see how you could create that infinite number of halfway points issue. But all you have to do is say, all right, let's give the tortoise and Achilles each 10 minutes to run, and let's see where they're at. And of course, Achilles is probably going to pass the tortoise up. Anyway, but it's an interesting paradox that has been discussed for a long time. All right, here's another answer to the problem of the one on the many, and that is Empedocles' answer. Empedocles said that there are 4 basic elements of reality. And so instead of there being one basis of reality, there's 4: earth, air, fire, and water. So we took 3 of these. They have already been discussed by other philosophers as the basis of all reality. He says, well, all of those plus earth, and these became the 4 traditional elements or principles of all things. And then finally, Leucippus and Democritus, they came up with the first atomic theory. They thought that everything arose mechanically out of a coagulation of an infinite number of irreducible atoms. That sounds almost scientific. Now, I know it's not quite right, but they they talked about atoms and how that is the one thing, the unifying thing, out of which comes all the diversity. All right, so the pre-Socratics, they wrestled with this issue, but I think that Christianity offers the best solution in taking this all the way back to the existence of God and the Trinity. Because who do we know God to be? He's ultimate reality, right? And all the diversity comes from him. But look at the very nature of God. We know that he's one, but we also know that he is triune. So even within the Godhead, there is diversity. We see in God unity in diversity and diversity in unity. And his creation reflects his Trinitarian nature, reflects his nature in many ways. And of course, we're made in his image, as he said we were. But think about the fact that the universe which God made consists of time, right? Which is Trinitarian itself, consisting of past, present, and future. It also consists of space, which can be divided into length, width, and height. So you take this little clicker. It has length, it has width, and it has height. You take away all of the length, how much of a clicker do you have? Nothing. Poof, it goes away. You have to have all three dimensions to have space, to have an object, a real object, not just a theoretical, two-dimensional object. And then you have matter, which is composed of energy in motion producing phenomena. So you have those three things: energy, motion, phenomena. So you have a trinity of trinities that the entire universe consists of. This isn't just a superficial illustration. This seems to be a reflection of the Trinitarian nature of God in the universe. It seems like God has left his fingerprints on what he has made. It's very interesting. And we see this diversity in unity within the universe that is rooted in the Trinitarian nature of God, the Creator. So those are some thoughts on the problem of the one and the many, and how Christianity offers the best explanation for why there is one, or why everything is unified, and why there is such diversity within the one unified whole.